Good morning. With the help of Hashem, we are learning Yerushalmi Kalayim, Pedikei, Halacha Dalit, Halacha Hey, and Halacha Vav. We're learning Daf Nun Aleph, and we are mamish on top of Daf Nun Aleph, Amud Aleph. Now, the Mishnah in Halacha Dalit was addressing a vineyard that was planted with vines and rows that have 4 amma intervals, not less than 4 ammas, because as we learned before, that if you plant rows within 4 ammas, one of the other, it's not halachically called a kedem. Then the Mishnah went on and spoke about 5. Then the Mishnah spoke about 6 and spoke about 7. The Mishnah did not speak about 8, and there's a reason for that. Even though really we learned in the previous chapter that when you have a kedem gadol, the Mishnah says that there we allow to up to 16 amma intervals between one row and the other. But as we also learned on Daf Mem Gimel, and we're going to review it in a moment, that Rabbi Lezer or Rabbi Elazar, he clarified and he qualified the shear of under 16 ammas, and our Mishnah, as the Gemara will point out, by not specifying what happens if a kedem is planted with 8 amma intervals, that will be a siyua to the shita again of Rabbi Elazar that we learned on Daf Mem Gimel, as we'll review in a moment. Halacha Hey is an extremely important halacha, which continues into halacha Vav. By Hashgacha Pratis, yesterday, Dani the Gabbai really brought up this topic. Now, I wanted to say the following, that when we learned in halacha Dalid, when we learned the Mishnah began by giving 2 scenarios. The Mishnah said that Hanoiteya, Yerek, and Hamekayim. And here, these are Yesoidistic rules. There is a huge difference between one who plants versus one who maintains. First of all, let's define maintaining. Maintaining in the Mishnah means that there's a wild vegetable meaning that no human being planted it. It got planted by itself, by nature. And when that happens, when, let's say, a vegetable gets planted in a vineyard, 2 things need to happen. First of all, the owner has to become aware that it's there. It's amazing. If there is no awareness that the vegetable or the grain is in the kedem, it does not create kilei hakedem. Number 1. Number 2, even when there is awareness, that in itself is also not problematic. It's the awareness and then the willingness of the owner to allow it to continue to be. That's called you're being mekayim. So if, as we're going to learn later in the daf today, if there is an awareness, but there is no willingness, it's not nichole. He actually has a plan to uproot it, even though there is a justifiable reason, but he's not uprooting it this moment, it's also not a problem. So you have to be aware and you have to want it to be there. Now, a third detail, and that's perhaps the most important detail. And if I misspoke this above, which I don't remember, I never knew this in my memory. So this would be a correction to if anything was said before that was not correct. We mentioned a few times, and we're going to review today, that's the ground zero, that by Mekayim, you have the shear of 200ths. Let me explain what that means. If I have kilei hakedem that already grew, not in the field, and so I have a grape, and the grape was planted, God forbid, the vineyard was planted together with the with Yerakas, kilei hakedem. If this grape falls into a barrel of other grapes, so there is the application of bittul, but the ratio is super high. And the ratio is 200 to 1. 200 to 1 means when you have 200 grapes that are kosher grapes, 1 grape that's kilei hakedem, 1 is nullified in 200. Which means if it's 199 to 1, then there's no bittul yet. That will be the meaning of when we say 200ths.
It's not number of vines versus each other?
I gave an example of a grape. Now let's come back to our case. When you have a growth that you became aware of and you're being mekayim it does not become asur b'hano immediately. When does it become asur b'hano? Only from when you became aware, and you willingly left it there. Now it grew how much? At least a 200ths. Now you got a problem. Prior to it growing the 200ths, means when the added growth, when the Isur growth, when did the Isur begin? Not when the Zajac blew there by the wind. When did the Isur begin? Not even when you became aware of it, but when you willingly allowed it to continue. From that point, we begin to count. And once it hits a 200ths, so now it's not bottle. Now you got a problem. The need of it growing, that shear, be'isur, for it to create a problem, is only by mekayim and not by you planting it. That's the most important din that for me was wow. That means if a person plants a vegetable in their kerem, that act creates kilei kerem. Period. Now the vegetable has to take root. That if not, it's not called planting. But the moment it takes root, we don't go with the 200ths. We don't have to go there. But every time we will learn, as we'll learn today, that even after you got a problem, but it's only really a problem if it grew the amount that there's no more bittul, right? Not 200 to 1, but 199 to 1. A 200ths grew or more. Now you got a problem that's only by mekayim and not when you plant. Now, how are you going to measure blood? How do you know that it grew at 200ths? How do you know that?
That's the frage. How do you know?
And the Gemara is going to give us, guys, we should dance. The Gemara is going to give us a formula that's unbelievable, that even people like us can do. The Gemara is going to give a formula, and we're going to figure out how to make that cheshbon, like practically. All of that will be halacha hey. Now, halacha vav, and let's see how far we can get. We'll go into more details. It's now that we clarified that there is a huge difference between planting and maintaining. By planting, you right away create kilei kerem. By maintaining, even though you should not have maintained it, you shouldn't have willingly let it be. But even though you did that isur, there's no isur hana yet. You have to wait until it reaches a certain amount of growth. So there's a big difference. We have to clarify, and we're going to give specific cases where it's not so clear whether this is called planting, whether this is called makayim. So we're going to have to go, and the Mishnah will give us great details, and it's going to expand the meaning of planting, and it's going to expand the meaning of maintaining. That will be today's daf. And Chavra, let us start. So we're going back to yesterday's share was very easy. So when we just learned about the rule of 16 amma of a radius, and then the Mishnah says, and again, let's go on top of Daf Nun Aleph, that Hoya Nutuya Sheish al Sheish, or Sheva al Sheva. And the Mishnah doesn't speak about what happens if Nutuya is 8 on 8. And that's a real kasha. Why is it a real kasha? And a chanami, when you have a kerem chotoin, which is not the case of our Mishnah, right? We already said yesterday, our Mishnah is speaking about a vineyard that had 7 rows of 7. For you to hit 45 vines that are in the radius of 16 amas, like we learned yesterday, we're speaking about a large vineyard. A large vineyard, guys, let's chazer, is any vineyard that has at least 3 rows, and each row has at least 3. That's the definition of a kerem, or bigger. By a kerem gadol, we learned in the previous chapter that as long as the rows are within 16 amas, they are a drop under 16 amas, excluding the trunks, you got yourself a vineyard. So why didn't the Mishnah give an example of 8 or a 9 by 9? Says the Gemara, Hadas is Messiah le Rabbi Lazar. Now let me just say by heart what we learned on Daf Mem Gimel. Rabbi Lazar said that even though the Mishnah said that under 16 is still a kerem, he says no, that's only midirabanan. It's not the oiraisa, which means that if you have a vineyard and the person allowed for there to be 8 amas, 9 amas, 10 amas, 11 amas, 12 amas, 13 amas, 15 amas between the rows, even though the Mishnah says that by a kerem gadol it's called a kerem, that means that now you have the avodah of 4 amas, not 6 tvachim, and lechatchila midrabanan, you're not allowed to plant in there a foreign seed because you have yourself a kerem midrabanan. But if you violated the Isur Darabanan, when you violate an Isur Darabanan by Kilei HaKerem, what is will never become Asur Bahana. And even by a Kerem Gadol, what is the definition biblically of a vineyard when the rows are within 8 amas? And that and the proof will be from our Mishnah. In other words, that the Rabbi Lazar Omar only ma'arba amayis va'at shmoina. Even by the Kerem Gadol, you only have a vineyard if the spacing is, it can't be less than 4, but it can't be more than 8. And when you have such a thing, that means when you planted it, biblically creating a kerem, then not only may you not plant in the 4 amma avoidam, asur, but if you did it, that's where the Torah says that you create the mikadesh is a negative here, that you make kilei kerem. Mishmoina va'at sheish esrei. Even though, again, the Mishnah says, I'm not talking about all opinions. I'm talking because the Mishnah concluded Rabbi, Rab Shimon, even the Tanakama. Even though the Tanakama says you have a kerem, no. Yes, but no. Yes, meaning it's also, you have a kerem midrabanan, and the consequence of it only being an isur derabanan, we're not, God forbid, minimizing the isur derabanan, is that the chachamim, whenever there is a kerem midrabanan, there is no isur hana, the eno mekadosh. And therefore, look inside, let's just read the top, Ma'araf Fulda, Ma'arba Amis Va'at Shmoino, Hecha Shenat HaKerem Dal Dal Amis, Hey, Atches, V'loi Ches Bechlal, only then also no mekadosh. Abel Mishmoina, I'm reading the Ma'araf Fulda, Ba'at Zayin, even though, yes, the Mishnah writes Lit Hanakama, you have yourself a kerem, and therefore, Asur Lizraya, even outside 6 Tvachim, right, Samachloi, because you're bound by the 4 Ameh, right? Nevertheless, v'izara. But since it's only a derabanan, eina mekadesh agafanim, to the level that sheyei asru bahana'a. And now Misayei le'memas nisan concludes the Maram. Why didn't the Mishnah give a case of ches al ches? Shma mino she'ein sham kiddush. V'hatano mekadesh ketani. And we're speaking about a scenario where if you violated, you're creating isur hana. You can't give an example of 8 on 8 or anything higher than that. Gavaldik. Okay. Now we are starting halacha hey. So says the Mishnah, even though we learned in halacha Dalit, like we mentioned, we learned on Daf Mem Tesamet Beis, the Mishnah began by juxtaposing Hanoiteya Yerek Oy Hamakayim. And Anachanami, by both, it could lead to Isur Hana. But, as we mentioned, there is a huge difference. And just to repeat this, when a person plants vegetables or grains or legumes in a vineyard, within the avoida of the vineyard, right, even outside, within 4 ames, they not only violated the lavin of planting, but they create a isur hana'a right away. When a person did not plant it, the problem is that you're not allowed to maintain it. There's 2 steps that have to happen. And it's amazing. And the step number 1 is you have to be aware of it. And how will you have that awareness? By seeing. Open up your eyes. Says the Mishnah, if you see a vegetable growing in a vineyard, don't think that the awareness in itself triggers the isur. No. Number 1, you have to be aware. And number 2, your reaction to the awareness has to be that you want to keep it there. Then you got yourself a problem. The moment the person in their minds, they don't want it to be there. Now, normally, if I don't want something to be in my field, if you don't want someone to be in your house, kick them out of your house. But if there is an explanation why you're going to get to it, but you're not going to do it this second because right now you're doing something more important, then your act of not kicking him out doesn't mean you want him to be there. It means you didn't get to that yet. You have more important things to do. And in our case, V'amar, the Roya says that Kisha'agi aloi el kitenu, when I will reach it, I will pick it. We're speaking about a person, this is very important, who's in the middle of harvesting the field. And when you harvest a vineyard or any field, there's a seder, there's a rhyme and a reason. You're going through the roads. And even if you have a kerem gadol, and you see something in the distance, and you are working so slow because you are a slow person, that by the time from now until when you get there, it's going to grow more than the 200s. Doesn't matter. Does not matter. Even though you are aware of it. It's amazing. Because when you see it, if you said to yourself, oh yeah, I'm not going on a coffee break, but I don't have to skip out of my order. When I'm getting to that, I'm going to uproot it. Kisha agialoi el ketenu. El ketenu means picking. It means I'll uproot it. So the din is chevre. It's amazing. Mutter. Mutter means that even from when you were aware until when you got there, it grew 200s, you don't have any isur at all. So when do you begin counting the time to see if you're going to get a 200s? That kisha achzar el ketenum, you are there. Now you can pick it up. And you say, well, I don't mind that it's here right now. I'll pick it up whenever. That's boom. Now you got a problem. In other words, when you neglect, the neglect of picking it up means you are okay that it's there. The word neglect can only be used if you could have and you didn't. Could have meaning that it was in front of you. But if it's not in front of you and you saying, I'm going about my day, I'm not giving chashivos to klipa so much that I have to go out of my way. When I'll get to you, I'll get to you. That's not called that you neglected of getting rid of it. It means that you're not allowed, you're not giving it that much power. That's okay. This is very important. Now, in the final case, where we do have neglect, or let me use other words of the Rishonim, that you are okay that it's there now. Even that which you should not have done, you should not have done that, but it doesn't mean it becomes asur bahana. If you planted it, it becomes asur bahana right away. Here, you didn't plant it. Elama, you neglected to pick it up. Now you are mekayim. Now we have this final layer. Now a clock begins to tick. What's the clock? That im hoisev b'mosayim. Then it's asur, very important. And if it's not hoisev b'mosayim, even though you violated being mekayim kalayim, but nothing is asur bahanu. Now I want to speak out three things, very important. Everything is important. First of all, there's a big machlokes between the Rambam, who we learn, and many other Rishonim. When we speak about, I know all of these things, I know we mentioned, and I'm sure that I did not always give the right information. I know I didn't have it. So this is a correction for everything we said until now. The Rambam holds that if we're speaking about a vineyard in which, in it or right near it, you have a vegetable or a grain, the only Masayim is needed by the vegetable, by the grain, by the foreign seed. If the foreign seed has a 200ths, not only is the vegetable asur bahana, the vineyard is asur bahana. What did we learn yesterday? How much of the vineyard, the radius that we learned. Now we have the whole picture, the 16 amma radius. The Rambam says that the only item we are looking at is the foreign, is the vegetable. The Rash, right, the Mefreitish on Mishnayos, and many other Rishonim say no. They say if the vegetable has hoisev masayim, the vegetable is asur. If the kerem, if the vines hoisev b'masayim, the kerem is asur. Each one is judged by themselves. It's possible that one has and one doesn't. The one that has is asur banon. The one that doesn't is not yet asur banon. So just to be aware, that's one big machlokes. Another big akasha. When we said again that there is a shear of 200ths, just explaining what that means. What I'm saying now is not according to all, but many understand that since if you have one grape that falls into 200 grapes, the ratio is 200 against one, it's nullified. That's the halacha. But if it's even 199 permissible, one asur, they all become asur. That's the 200ths. So there is no bittul, it's asur because there isn't bittul.
We're talking about growth, Rabbi. That's what I don't get.
Okay, so here, I know what I'm going to say now is going to somehow address to what's in your heart, but let me use the kasha that Tosfos asked. Tosfos says that I don't understand. Before it got to the size of a 200ths, when it was less than that, it was batel. There is a concept in halacha that's called kame batel. Like we're building a mikvah. According to most, when you have halachic rainwaters and you add to it not good waters, mayim she'uvim, you already have 40 saw. One drop becomes nullified, becomes good. The next drop becomes nullified. The next drop becomes nullified. According to some Rishonim, you can add and add and add and add and add. And even if the mitzias you have the majority of mayim she'uvim, it doesn't matter. It's called kame bat. Ve'eino chayzer v'neir. So Tosfos says, if the reason why hoisev b'masayim asur, which is the way most of the Rishonim learn, It's connected to the rule that Kilei Akedem is only batal echad b'masayim. So up until it grew that much, it was nullified. Once it became nullified, it should constantly become nullified. It should never become asur b'hana. Kama batal, and the eino chayzer v'neir.
Rabbi,
okay.
The question is, what's the measurement of 200 of a vegetable versus the keren? Like,
we'll get to. Okay, so what I'm saying is like this. Let me go to the Rambam blood. If I planted a carrot, from when I knew the carrot is there, not I planted, it got there by itself, wild carrot. From when I was aware and I neglected to pick it up, from that moment we begin counting. Let's say by a carrot, let's just say that it takes 30 minutes. I'm giving just a stamp. It takes 30 minutes for it to grow. In addition, the amount that will be echad b'masai. Let's say the carrot is 200 grams. It is 199 grams. And for this carrot to grow that 1 gram, it takes 30 minutes. So we counted 30 minutes. The Rambam holds that once 30 minutes passes, so now the carrot is asur b'hana, now the vineyard is asur b'hana. That's what the Rambam says. We don't even have to measure the vines, whether they were hoisav b'masayim. Only look at the foreign seed. And on the other hand, if the grapes grew more than echad b'masayim, but if this vegetable takes more time, in this 30 minutes, it didn't go a gram, then everything is okay. Even though you violated Mekayim, but you don't create Isur Bahana only if hoisav b'masayim. But I want to go back to Tosfos. Tosfos gives a very important answer, and he says that when something is mechuber and continuously grow, came on what you said, there is no bittul. In my case was you have a grape, one grape got mixed in other grapes. You have water, but here it's growing and it's mechuber. Something that is mechuber and as something connected to the ground, it's a living mechuber. That means it's growing. There is no bittul. We don't say kama batal. Now, on the other hand, if you plucked it before echad b'masayim, if you plucked it out of the ground, you cannot say that it's usher to be consumed. Here I will say it was batal. But there isn't a real kama batal to the place where you say eino chayzer v'neir. And this is a gavaldik Tosfos, and it's a big call. Okay, now says the Gemara, Chavradaf nun aleph amid beis. So when we mentioned that awareness and neglect, how do you define neglect? So we gave a mashal, you're picking your field, you're picking your vineyard, and the guy is saying, when I'll get there, I'll do it. That only works if you're a worker. If you're a worker, there's a reason why you're not jumping to get rid of the kilayim, because you're busy working right now. Indeed, Rabbi Yosef Bar Chanina Amar, that our mission is only bepoyel shanu. Meaning, if the balabas is not picking the grapes, he's only supervising. We don't say by him that he has any right, once he becomes aware, to allow it to be there. The moment he doesn't go immediately to uproot it, it's already called neglect. It's called that he's okay that it's there. And you begin counting down towards the echad b'masayim. And indeed, the Gemara clarifies, it's not about the worker versus the balabas. It's about, are you working or are you not working? If the balabas is the worker, then the same heter goes to the balabas. That's what the Gemara clarifies. That balabai yishu asu b'malachtai, then asu oisoi kepoil. He will be like a poil. Beautiful.
Now, so the 1/200 is not a real measurement of anything.
Sure it is.
It's this. No one can notice a growth of 0.005 inches.
The Gemara will give you 1 second. Again, I know. Let's wait, and you will see that the Gemara before halacha vav will tell you how to measure it. Mamish. Even we can learn from it how to do it. Now, 1 second. I want to read. There's enough time. There's a Rambam. Don't ask. We're going straight to the answer without suffering with the question. The Rash Irilio, look inside the top right column. He adds a little nuance of how you learn the Gemara, and therefore he explains the Rambam. So he says, "Umishum hachi loy atrichua rabbanan lihisbatal mimalachtai kegoin shu kablan umishum kedei chayav." There's another nuance about a poil that the Rash adds. A worker, Why can't the worker stop and go there? A worker that gets paid per hour, that's the problem when you pay workers. They don't care. They don't care how much they produce. They say, I work, pay me. We're speaking about a worker that he gets a certain part of what he picks. So let's say if he's going to stop and go out of order, he's going to end up picking less. There is a loss for the worker. Another nuance. Aval adam achar zakte rash Cirilio shahoya sham virao. If another person saw it, loy plug ela ben kishagia ben kisha echsor asur loy. He will never be allowed to eat it because the mekayim kalaymu. I just want to read that and if someone later is going to look, has more time, you're going to see that Rambam writes something and that Ivid says, where do you get it from? That Rambam never even mentions the word poil. It's as if that Rambam didn't learn the Gemara, which is a big problem. And the way this little thing, for the whole Rambam. Okay, now back in the Gemara. The Gemara brings a Brais. And the Brais says like this. Again, we're speaking not about planting. We're speaking about Mikayim. It grew in the wild. The Balabas becomes aware. Number one, if you're not aware, even if it grew not a 200, it doubled the size. There's no issue. You can eat it. It's amazing. You can eat it. When you became aware and you neglected, that's your Makayim. So now another detail. Who may not eat it? So the Braisa says, if you're the owner, if the owner was Makayim, Asurim, it becomes prohibited bein loy, bein la'ach, to anyone. But what about a worker? If a worker does not own it, even though the poil was not allowed to do that, the poil needed to uproot it. And let's go with the Rashirilio, another detail, that if the poil gets paid per hour, he cannot even say, well, when I'm going to get there. He's getting paid per hour. He's not going to lose money by uprooting it. Go and uproot it. Now, the only thing is he doesn't own it. So the Braisa says that he will never be allowed to eat it. But all other people will be allowed. Anayazach. Everyone else can eat it. So the Gemara is asking, oh, hold on. If his awareness and his lack of uprooting it, that means his neglect is, and guys, and it added the 200s. The Baraisa doesn't have to say it. Now you have Kilei Akerem. What do you mean? Asr loy mutal achedim. Where do you find such a thing? Fekashia im asr loy. So then yehi asr l'chaladim. Im mutal l'chaladim yehi mutal loy. Says the Gemara, beautiful. And we learned this. And Daf Samach Gimel Amid Beis. I know we didn't learn it in the Gemara, but we quoted him already before. There's a Rab Shimon that says a klal, Ela ke Rab Shimon the Amar Ein Adam Magdish Davar She'ena Shaloi. You cannot render prohibited something that's not yours. Parenthetically, I know we mentioned it above. We'll mention it again later. I'll quote the whole Tosfos when we get Daf Samach Gimel, God willing. It's not the way it sounds. You know, even Rab Shimon who says, I cannot prohibit something that's yours. If I, God forbid, if I take your food and I put chazir in it, you're not allowed to eat your food. Make no mistake. It's not the way it sounds so simplistic. But still, Rab Shimon dramatically limits my ability to prohibit something that's not mine. So that's the word. That's the point. The worker has no ownership in it. So you would think that according to Rab Shimon, just because the worker became aware, what do we care about the worker's awareness? He doesn't own it. And awareness is a non-tangible. So nevertheless, Rab Shimon holds that the chiddush, that he does make it usher for him. And why is that? We're going to use the word Shabya Anafshe Chaticha Deisura. He will never be allowed to eat. And now the Gemara gives noch a layer. This is so good. And we're going to go with the girsa that you have in the brackets, not the girsa of the parentheses. What we said above is only if that vegetable was picked by someone else, which means that a worker saw it, and the worker allowed it to be there. And now it grew at 200s. So we are saying, according to Rab Shimon, another person can eat it. So the Gemara says, yeah, another person can eat it if the other person was the one that picked it. Okay? Now, why would another person pick it, Yakir? Because let's say Reuven is the worker. Let's say it takes 30 minutes for it to add the 200 growth. So the Reuven, the worker, saw it at 6 a.m. and he let it there. So we're learning that according to the Tanit of Shimon, his awareness and his leaving it there cannot do anything. Now it's already 6:45. Now it grew at 200s. Now what happens if Shimon sees it right now? And Shimon sees it, and Shimon does not allow for it. Shimon says, what do you mean? Chaim's field has kalayim. He doesn't know chachmas. He picks it out. Shimon can eat it. Shimon, that's the word. Someone else picked it. They can eat it. But what happens if this worker, Reuven, himself picked it 6:45? And let me add a detail. And the balabas paid the worker with produce. And he paid him with this produce. Was the owner allowed to pay him with this produce? Yes. Because from the owner's perspective, it's not usher. But now Reuven owns it. Now for him it's usher. If Reuven owns something that is usher for him, it now becomes usher to everyone. In other words, now usher bein lechol adam. And as we just mentioned, we're speaking about someone who got paid with the produce.
Was he a partner? What if he was a partner?
No, if he becomes a partner, then it becomes usher to everyone.
Everyone.
Saris, no? This is what you call it, a saris. No?
An oris. Yeah.
Oris, yeah, oris.
Yeah. And that goes back to what the Rashanilio said. So if you have...
I'm sorry, I'm still a bit confused here. Okay, so the growth you measure is not the growth against the vines, it's the growth of it, first of all.
Of it, yes.
Okay, and then how do you, like, the growth you measure, like, for example, you use the example of a carrot. Carrot grows down, so what do? You measure by time? Is that the measure?
So let's read it inside. Again, I know the Gemara is going to give you how you measure. But before we go on, Vlad, just remember that you have a big machlokes rishonim. The Rambam holds that when you have a vineyard, and the problem is the nukam, the problem is the vegetable. The hoisef b'mosayim is measured by the vegetable against itself. But if the vegetable against itself, from when you became aware and you neglected, has 200, not only does the vegetable become usher, so does the surrounding vines. And the Rash says no, that from when you became aware in the vegetable and you left it there, you have to make 2 clocks. One is to measure the vegetable, one is to measure the surrounding vines. Same idea, that if the grapes, from when that moment happened, now remained in the ground, or the vegetable remained in the ground, and the grape grew more 200s, now the grapes are asr b'hana. If the grapes did not grow 200s, even if the vegetable did, according to the Rash, the grapes remain mutar b'hana. So I just want to, don't forget that. Layers. Now, how do you do that? So says the Gemara, this is what happened. What happened is that the Vei Rabbi Yanai, the yeshiva bachrim, right? The Vei means the household. The household means the chevra, the chasidim, the talmidim of Rabbi Yanai. What they did was they used to experiment how to measure misha'arin b'hodein yarbuza. They used a yarbuza. They used a yarbuza as either an amaranth. Kevin is already jumping on Google, or it is a asparagus. What's important is that the formula that we are giving is not only for the amaranth or for the asparagus. They made an experiment by those 2 vegetables, and they presumed, and halachically we presume that everything that grows will have the same formula. What was the formula? This is what they did. This is the experiment. Yeah, a couple of words that are gavaldik. So this is what happens over here. They took this yarbuza, Vlad, and it's from whatever point, no matter how much it grew already, They were planted at the same time. They were on the same place of development, zusammen, and they plucked one out, and they wanted to see this vegetable, how long in time, in hours and minutes, does it take for it to lose its moisture. And what they realized is that, let's say, just as a mashal, Vlad, that it would take, for this yarbuza, let's just say, it would take 100 hours for it to lose all of its moisture. It has to do with the size of the plant at that time. But at this time, this plant needs 100 hours to lose all of the moisture. Now, you can go into details. Where was it? Was it in Miami, where everything is moist? Was it in California? Was it in Teveri Ir HaKodesh? Was it in Tzfas Ir HaKodesh? That detail the Gemara doesn't give. But this is the formula. If whatever time it takes for something to dry out, exactly that's the same time on your clock that it takes to grow. So let me give you my mashal. If it takes on this yarbuza at this size, when they plucked it out, if it took at that moment 100 hours for it to completely dry out, we're looking for 200s. What's 200s? What's one? You understand? What's 200s of 100 hours? A half an hour. In 100 hours, you have 200 half an hours, right, Vlad? So for that, at this size, it would take 30 minutes for it to be Hoysav B'Mosayim. If it would take, at this point, it grew so much that now it will take 200 hours for it to completely dry out. So then it would take 1 hour for it to be Hoysav B'Mosayim. That's the pshat. Masha Zeh Poiche said they realized that the time that it takes the plucked out one to dry out, exactly that is the time that the one that was not plucked out is growing. How great is that?
Why?
That's the way Hashem made the world. That
every
plant.
Experiment.
They found out that it mirrors each other. You know, it's
and
either you're growing.
What's the lashon?
The mash is that poicha is that moisef. Let me use Hasidic words. You know, when it says in the Hayom Yom that the beginning of the end of the Ruchni is the death is losing Geshmak and davening. In other words, when you have Geshmak and davening, then the neshama is growing. When you're getting dried out, now how long does it take from when you lose your Geshmak and davening for a person to lose the Geshmak and learning? It depends. You know, every vegetable is different. But if we're not connected, we begin to dry out. If you are connected, then you begin to add. You are increasing, and it's exactly.
One is getting moisture through the air. One is getting through the soil.
I know that. No, one is growing through the soil, and one is losing. Not only are you losing growth, it's like once a certain age. I don't know what the age is. All of these tall, handsome people like you, Kevin, that are 6.5 feet. When you become 90 later, you begin to shrink. And mitamol, you know, in the first years we're growing, and then at the end we look like a baby. Mishkan Seined and Mishkan Beined, and we're back in a diaper, and we're little, and we're kvetching, and we're crying. The same, you know, there's Zepoicha Zemoisiv. Okay, right. We have time. Let's go with the next mission. So now that the Mishnah has to clarify, how do you define planting? How do you define you know, what we call maintaining? But maintaining is based on the fact that you didn't plant it. So if you didn't plant it, how was it there? It sprouted. So let's use these words. By planting, there's no 200. You planted it, usher right away. If you didn't plant it, you have to be aware, you have to not neglect, and you have all these steps. Now, it's very easy to say, planting, I know what planting means. I put it in the ground, and I know what sprouting means. Sprouting means that the wind blew it in there. I know that's correct, but let's expand that. So the Mishnah will give a couple of cases where you'll see it's like an in-between. You have to have the Torah to determine, is this in the category of planting? Is this in the category of sprouting? So says Halach Vav, says the Holy Mishnah, a person is passing through his own vineyard and he's carrying seeds, but he did not actively place the seeds in the ground, seeds of carrots. The seeds were spilling out of his pocket without his knowledge. The naflu mimenu zerayim. You get it? In other words, he is unaware. He's unaware that his own seeds are falling into the vineyard. It's not mamash sprouting. One might have thought, what do you mean? It's coming out of his pocket. Or I'll tell you more, it can be in his hand. He has it in his hand, and without his awareness, some of it fell out of his hand. Another example, even better. You are fertilizing your kedem. You're throwing the fertilizer. You don't know that in the fertilizer you have seeds of vegetables. You are watering your vineyard. You are throwing the water. Elama, you don't know that in the water you have seeds. You get it? In other words, so is it planting or is it sprouting? Or hazoireya v'si'aratu haruach la'achrav. You have a vineyard to the right. You have a grain field to the left. They are separated, kahalach. You're planting grain in your grain field, but it's windy, like we have today, winds. And the wind is carrying the seeds from your grain field into your vineyard. So if the wind blew the seeds and the seeds are flying behind you, so in all of these cases, even though you are active in some way, it's still called sprouting. And therefore, it's muter. In other words, it will become asur, like we learned before. You have to become aware. You have to neglect, and then you have to begin to count them. But let's go. You have two fields. You have a vineyard and you have a grain. Separated kahalach. You're planting your grain field. And there's wind, but the wind blew the seeds in front of your eyes. Here you can't say, I didn't plant it there. No. You were planting it. And you know it went there. That's already called planting. That's siaratu haruach lefanav. Rabbi Akiva says that you got a problem. And like we mentioned, what do you have to do? This has the status of planting. It becomes asur right away. If it becomes asur right away, what do you need to do, my friends? You have to uproot it. But there's one leniency, b'chlal. When you have seeds that are in your vineyard and you have to uproot it, let me tell you the harder way, let me tell you the easier way. The harder way is for you to go every single seed. Go figure every single seed. How would you do that? You go into the ground. So you don't have to chase every single seed. You have to turn over the ground. And when you turn over the ground, you can presume you killed it. But lavdafka, you killed it. Now, b'chlal, there's going to be three halachic stages when a grain, we're speaking about just an example, a grain is growing. Number one is that when it comes out, it looks like a grass. It's very greenish. Then from there, it turns into a stalk, but it's not yet a third of its growth. And then once it reaches a third of the growth, of its mature growth, let's say of a barley, of a wheat, that's called already dagan. Okay? So grass, stalks, grain. And then every time you have to turn it over. So Rabbi Akiva says, that's called planting, because you saw it flying there. So if you see the grass, you got to right away turn over the grass. You don't have to go to every single one, turn over the area. If you did that, you're good, but maybe you would not successful. How would you know that? If bited it grows, or now if you have the stalks, im aviv, that's the not yet a third is called aviv, then you're not baits. Then you gotta shake the kernels out of the shaft and scatter them. It may be a dogain, and if it's already a third, that's called grain. You gotta burn it. And you can't say, I never neglected, I was busy. If this would have had the status of Mikayim, then you wouldn't have to burn it because you didn't want it to be there. You did your job. But since it's already in the category of planting, so we don't need the Hoysav B'Masayim, the Isser kicks in right away. And therefore, if you have